I'm going to introduce our guest, Dawood Ali, in a moment. But first, to set a little context, we did 9 sessions on the Quran, and we looked at the great courses, Introduction to the Quran with Professor Martin Oliver. I talked to Dawood this week, and Dawood had viewed about half of those lectures. Dawood, how did you do on the rest of them? Did you have a chance to look at them?
I ended up watching about half of the lecture in the end. I intend to watch the rest of them.
Okay.
Fairly, I don't know if it'll be soon or not, but yeah, I had a pretty good impression. He has a lot of knowledge. Most of the stuff was pretty spot on. I'm nitpicky on details, so I noticed every little thing he did that was a little bit off from what I've learned as a Muslim, but I'm being hypercritical. I actually would recommend this course to people. It has a lot of good content.
Well, good. That's good to know. And thank you for taking a look at it. I hope it was helpful for you as a student and teacher of Islam also, and not only for our course or our session today. And during our 9 weeks of looking at those 9 lectures, questions came up that I certainly couldn't answer. And I thought we really need somebody who lives the Muslim faith, who is informed about the Muslim faith. Dawood Ali was born in Iowa, the faraway land of Iowa, to a Christian American mother and a Muslim Indian father. He grew up as a practicing Muslim in Chicago and graduated from the University of Illinois with an engineering degree. While his professional life has been involved with engineering and information technology, his personal life has been engaged in Islamic learning and teaching since his teenage years. He was actively involved in the operation of the Institute of Islamic Information and Education since its inception in 1986, becoming its managing director. He has been the director of the Muslim Youth Camp for the Muslim Community Center of Chicago for 15 years, teaching boys 12 to 18 years old about living life as a Muslim in America. He is currently a speaker for the Muslim community to a variety of audiences, educating the public about Islam and Muslims. Again, welcome, Dawood.
Thank you, Reverend.
Right to our first question. Is there anything else, by the way, that you wanted to say about Martin Oliver's lectures, or you've given us a little synopsis of your impression of those already?
Yeah, I was good.
You're done with that? Okay. Yeah. Let's go on to the first question. One of the things we learned about in the Quran course was about how the Quran went from being an oral revelation to Muhammad to being written down as a book, and what is known about that process. And I found that part very interesting myself. Specifically, we learned about the Uthmanic Codex compiled by Tabit, how do you say that? Tabit. And the fact that, according to Professor Oliver, some fragments of verses were left out of the Tabit Codex, which raises questions then about the whole original process. Now, our question about this to you is, are questions like this encouraged as young Muslims learn about their faith, or as non-Muslims inquire about Islam? Are questions about what's known and what's unknown, about the complicated process of oral transmission to written text, are those kinds of questions encouraged? And what kinds of answers are given?
Thank you, Reverend. Before I address the question, I actually wanted to kind of set the tone and remind ourselves of our human nature, if you will. Something that we all have is we have a lens through which we view the world. That lens might be guided by our parentage, how they treated us. They might be influenced by the religion that we subscribe to, whether we're a devout follower of that religion or we're very loose follower of that religion, or we don't subscribe to religion at all. It might be through the lens of our financial well-being, our possibly the way that society treats us, based on the color of our skin, or the language of our name, or the accent that we carry when we speak. There's lots of ways that the world perceives us, and how we interpret the way that people view us. That lens is unique to every single one of us, and it's very, very difficult to put that lens aside and see it through a different lens. And what I'm going to ask you, all of you today to do is to do your best to assign your own personal lens and walk in the shoes of someone else. And that's a tall order for just about everyone, including myself. But I'm going to ask you to do your best. Just for transparency, my own lens is one of a white American male, heterosexual. I grew up as an American with everything that you can think of as an American. I went to public school. I went to an American university. English is my only language. We were middle class, very average upbringing that I had. And so I've experienced America just the same as just about all of you, I imagine, in some respect. But I also grew up with the lens of a Muslim, and so I have an Islamic view of the world and the way that Muslims view each other in my background. And so I see both of these, and when I was a child, I had an ideal representation of these things. And as I grew older, I came to realize how America has its problems that deviate from the theory of the American ideal, and Muslims have their problems that deviate from the Islamic ideal. And so I'm sharing this with you to let you know that I see things from two different viewpoints, and sometimes they're the same and sometimes they're very different. Now, when it comes to the question of controversies, if you will, or controversial topics, I get these a lot of times in non-Muslim gatherings, or new Muslim gatherings, or gatherings with the Muslim youth. Really because people don't know, and the question comes in usually in the format, I heard that such and such and such. I heard that the Quran was compiled in a particular way. Is this true? I heard that women are treated in a particular way. Is this true? And so I see the question, and I do my best to answer I give the best answer that I can regarding what the question is. But the willingness to do that comes from my own perspective. I want to be able to give people or help people and teach people. That's something that I enjoy, and I have an open, inquisitive mind. Other people are not necessarily like that. Here in the U.S., when I went to school, the predominant idea amongst students is question everything that is presented to you, for its veracity. For other people in a more authoritarian culture, they might not question things at all. And so, depending on who the person is, I'll get some questions. I might not. For a vast majority of people are really just looking for guidance on what to do, and they want to know if they have to pray 5 times a day, and I say, well, yeah, that's what God told you to do. Some of the people that are more inquisitive, that might have a little bit higher level of knowledge, might be a little bit better educated, they're the ones that'll ask why. and want to get into some of the details of why something is the way that it is. Why is it that the Quran was compiled in the way that it was? You know, and some of the things that Dr. Oliver mentioned, it was good in many places, but in that particular story, there were a few things that were left incomplete that, from a Muslim viewpoint, I mean, the compilation of the Quran is not really controversial at all. There's no questions about it. And we can get into the details of what I understand compared to what Dr. Oliver mentioned. You know, if you all are curious, but as far as controversial questions go, it really depends on who's asking them. What's their background? You know, there's certainly no inhibition given in Islam itself, but the way that people are raised may inhibit them or may encourage them.
Thanks, Dawood. Back to sort of the premise to get us started with today. Is it safe to say that we should note that you do not speak for all Muslims in all time?
That's very true. I'm one among 1.6 billion or so, and I have a very 2021 context that I'm operating.
Right. I mean, sometimes we bring an interfaith speaker in and we think, oh, this person speaks for everyone who ever adhered to their faith. At the end of the day, we kind of speak from our own perspective, as you were saying, right?
Yeah.
And each perspective is different, even if we share a common faith with others. Back to our first question about how the Quran is compiled. You are a counselor, a teacher at the Muslim youth camp with boys. Would a boy, what were the ages again, to 12 to
18? 12
to 18. If there was a particularly precocious lad who raised a question about the compilation of the Quran, would that question be welcomed? And how would you respond to him?
At the camp that I teach, yes, it would be welcome. I asked that I almost always have several sessions where it's basically an open question and answer, and they ask anything they want. Now, a majority of the questions that they ask are about girls and sex and things like that, and also things about the last day and apocalypse and the things that they've heard about but don't really know too much about. They don't know anything about the compilation of the Quran. It's kind of there are no controversies among Muslims with regard to the compilation. Those were pretty much put to rest, you know, many centuries ago. But among other circles, you know, and I have been in some of those circles where someone asks a provocative question and they get a stare, like, how can you even ask that question? You know, it really depends upon the teaching style of the teacher, you know, to be honest. And there are some good teachers, and there are some kind of poor teachers. They really only want you to memorize what they teach you, and there's nothing else to it.
Would all questions be welcome?
In certain circles, yes. In certain circles, no.
That's a fair answer. It's important to note.
Yeah.
Let me go on to our second question about the Hadith and Sunnah.
Yeah.
We learned in the course about how important the Hadith and Sunnah are in being sort of a first circle outside of the Quran for interpreting the Quran. It's kind of my understanding, the Hadith being the various sayings and the life of the Prophet, and the Sunnah being the early practices of the community, or the practices of the early community. And someone raised a question during our sessions, are the Hadith and Sunnah actually books that your average Muslim might have on their personal library, so that they could go to those texts for assistance in reading and understanding the Quran?
So let's spend just a few seconds talking about the Hadith and the Sunnah. The Hadith is something, actually the Sunnah is just as you said, that the practices of the Prophet and the people that were around him. And there's, that includes biography, it includes the things that he said, it includes the things that the companions did. It's a very wide, very broad subject. The Hadith, on the other hand, are a very narrow subset. The Hadith are recordings of what the Prophet said, what the Prophet did, and what he approved of. And the people that transmitted these things from one observer to the next person to the next person, the chain of transmission, if you will. It was a very rigorous examination of the text and of the chain, and so it's important to understand that, because then, when it comes to the Sunnah, there are biographies that did not really go through that chain, and there are many stories that are not really rigorously examined, but the Hadith were. Now the Hadith are not really a book per se. The Hadith is the narration itself and its chain of transmitters. There are hundreds of thousands of these narrations. There's I mean, it's hard to even fathom how many there are. There are many people throughout history that have collected subsets of these in the form of books, and they've categorized them, or they've collected the subset based on a particular topic, and they wrote a book that included these. But these books are more like a law library. It's not even really a book or even an encyclopedia. I mean, it's huge. The vast majority of these are in Arabic, and so it's not really accessible unless you can read Arabic. Some of these have been translated into English. I have several volumes myself. And they take up a couple of shelves in my bookcase.
And what's an example of a compilation of hadith? You said they are sometimes compiled by subject matter. What's an example of one of those? So
you have, let's say, one of the more famous compilations is called Riyadh al-Salihin, the place of the Salihin, the place of the righteous. And this was I forget who the compiler was, but what he did is he went through two of the major other compilations, one by in Imam Bukhari, who lived in near Iraq, another one called Imam Muslim. His name was actually Muslim. And these were compiled maybe 100 to 200 years after the death of the Prophet Bukhari and Muslim. They collected tens of thousands of these hadith and verified their authenticity and chains. Sometime after that, an individual collected, chose from among those the hadith that were related to theology, related to worship, related to conducting yourselves in the home, and put them into this one book called Riyadh al-Salihin. And so they all related among those topics, and they all come from two of the most authenticated source materials, the collections of Bukhari and the collections of Imam Muslim. And as a student and teacher of Islam yourself, how often would you consult those two bookshelves of volumes? It kind of varied depending on where I was in life. Early on when I was in college and in the heavy duty learning mode, I would have them open, every couple of days. I'm looking stuff up. I was the one that published the newsletter on Friday, and I would include one of the hadith in there. And so I would browse through them and find something that would seem appropriate for the week. Nowadays, I don't do it as often as I used to, mainly because I'm so familiar with them already. But here and there, if I want to look something up, then I'll refer back to it, or I'll find sites online that have them easily searchable, which is a more common thing for me to do nowadays.
Yeah. So like a law library, those are online and searchable by keywords and so on.
Yes.
The Hadith and Sunnah are also.
Yep. Yeah. It makes things very easy to find. If you're looking for a particular topic or set of topics, you use Google and select the site, and it'll find everything where the words are close to each other.
How common is it for your imam giving a sermon on a Friday to cite a hadith or a sunnah?
It's a usual practice. I mean, the format of the Friday sermon is a quotation from the Quran, a quotation from the Hadith, and then going on to the topic at hand and how those quotations relate to what he's talking about.
And is my understanding correct that they really are used to illuminate the deeper meaning of the Quran?
So when it comes to the relationship between the Quran and the Hadith, we look at the Quran. Muslims view the Quran as the word of God, as delivered to Muhammad. Now, that's well and good, but how do you actually practice Islam as a human being? Well, that's where we look to the practices of Muhammad, and so we view them kind of simultaneously. One is the word of God and instructions. One of them is how to carry out the instructions, with regards to how to live your life, and taking those two as your primary sources. The people who study those things and study law and study philosophy, they will look at situations in life and the source material and come up with interpretations and guidance on how to apply those things in situations where it was not necessarily present at the time of the prophet.
Good, thanks. I'd like to move on to our next question, which arose again during our sessions. And when you and I talked this week, you said this is something that you knew the least about, but maybe you'll be able to give us some guidance. The question was, in majority Muslim nations, or where Muslims may be significantly present in the population, to what extent do civil authorities rely on the Quran to build their legal code? And my own guess when I was trying to field this question a few months ago was it really depends on the country, on what their own particular cultural heritage has been and what their understanding of themselves as a country is. Turkey is going to be different from Nigeria, is going to be different from Malaysia and Indonesia and Saudi Arabia and so on. And I gave the example off the top of my mind of Iraq, being a country that has Sunni Muslims, Shia Muslims, and non-Muslims, a significant Christian minority, for example. So over to you. How do majority Muslim nations today use the rich legal tradition of Islam to establish their own civil legal system?
So the real simple answer is they don't. That's pretty much what it boils down to. If you look at the vast majority of Muslim nations, at one point in time in their history, they were colonized by Europeans. The English, the Spanish, the Portuguese, whoever it may be. And when the Europeans instituted their rule in those nations, well, they instituted British law, Portuguese law, Spanish law to govern the nation. And so for many hundreds of years, those places were governed by those particular law systems. When they developed their own independence, they for the most part kept the colonial law systems. sometimes they incorporated some Islamic elements in it, and some more than others. In some cases, they didn't, and it remains, it's very I want to say various or kind of scattered. The amount of Islamic content in the law systems within Muslim nations. There's not a single nation on the planet that institutes what you would call Islamic law. There's simply a few injunctions or a few elements of law included within the system, and that's really about it.
Can we take an example like Saudi Arabia? You may not be an expert on this, but Saudi Arabia was actually a British protectorate before its independence, whenever that was. I want to say in the 20s or so. I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm guessing.
no, you're spot right. I think it's around in the 1920s.
It's dangerous, my guessing. But so the impression maybe in the West is that Saudi Arabia is a strict Islamic country and would be guided solely by Islamic law. Are you saying it's more complicated than that, or that's not true at all?
It's much more complicated than that. It's there's Islamic law is a very wide topic. The thing that people are most familiar with are the various forms of punishment for crimes in Islamic law, and that's actually a very small subset of Islamic law. The Islamic law system is it covers your personal behavior, it covers your civil behavior in between people, businesses. There's a lot of guidelines that are not really laws to be enforced, but it's like, this is behavior that you should adhere to. More like guidelines in it than anything else. When it comes to governments, they're really interested in did you violate the rights of someone else? And if you did, well, what should be the penalty for doing that? In some cases, they'll use some form of Islamic punishment. For the most part, however, they don't. If you look at some of the only other implementation of Islamic law that was attempted in recent times, and it was actually very poorly done, was the Taliban in the 1990s. The Talib is Arabic for student, so the Taliban is plural for students. All of these people that we call the Taliban, they were actually students from northern Pakistan, and so when they came to Afghanistan, they had their, just like I had when I was a student, an idealized notion of what an Islamic state should look like, what the laws should be like. But law and Islamic and the way that Muslims live is much greater than simply what the punishment for crimes are. You have to have institutions that support the homeless, that support people that are not very well off, that keep the wealthy in check, that dictate the rules of business. And unfortunately, the Taliban did not institute any of that. They just instituted a particular code amongst a people that didn't understand what the law was. And so they attempted to do the right thing but they did it in a really bad way.
To follow up on that, Dawood, are you suggesting perhaps that today's Taliban, which is very much a force in Afghanistan, is more mature and might do things differently should they ever share power or come to power?
That I don't know. I'm not really familiar with the current politics and ethos in Afghanistan and with the Taliban nowadays. There's strife between the existing government and the people and the other powers that be in the countryside or mountainside, I guess, of Afghanistan. I couldn't tell you. I don't know.
Yeah, fair enough. I was taking you down a road you may not be qualified to answer. I respect your humility. I respect it and I'm grateful for it. Moving on, the question of violence often comes up in these conversations, and it certainly did in our 9-week sessions. I have posed the question this way. The participants remain baffled as to how some Muslims can understand the Quran and their faith in general as justifying violence. How do some Muslims move from the Quran itself, which seems to be about love and brotherhood, sisterhood, and so forth, to what we might call fundamentalism and then related violence?
I'll answer by first posing a few, I guess, rhetorical questions to think about. One, are Christians and Christianity the same thing? You think about the answer to that. And then compare that with the related question, are Muslims and Islam the same thing? And you'll get a little bit of a view from the other side, if you will. Next, is Islam and Christianity the same thing? The religion itself. For that, I will propose to you that aside from a few theological differences regarding God and Jesus, that they are pretty much the same thing, Islam and Christianity. And the fourth and last question is, are Muslims and Christians the same thing? And I'll also propose to you that they are. You will have Muslims and Christians that are very devout and follow the ideals of Christianity. And you have Muslims and Christians that are very loose, if you will, in their adherence to Christian and Muslim ideals. And you have some Christians and Muslims that by their name or by their region where they live would appear to be Christians or Muslims, but don't really adhere to any ideals at all. And this is common between the two religions and between the two faiths. There is a lot of commonality if you are comparing the same thing to each other. And so when we look at questions like violence, like women, like well, anything really, to put things in, to kind of put a different set of glasses on, if you will, on how you view the world. Substitute Christianity for Islam, substitute Christians for Muslims in the sentence. And so if I were to do that with this question, I would say, how can some Christians understand the Bible and their faith in general as justifications for violence? How do some Christians move from the Bible itself to what we might call fundamentalism? And you view that and you think about it. What does Christianity had to say about it? What do Christians do about it in their lives? And you get some inclination as to how things operate in Islam and how Muslims operate. What you'll see is that people will do, and they will justify what their actions however they want to. If you look at the people that caused the insurrection in Washington this past January, they believed it was a God-given right and duty to do that. I don't think that it is a tenet of Christianity to revolt against your nation's leaders. That's, at least that would be my view on the thing. It's something that these people were told by their leaders. Their leaders use whatever means that they wanted. There's many, many instances of violence across a lot of religions in the world. You know, you look at Europe, and, you know, for 500 years, you know, during the Dark Ages, if you will, and what happened there. Now, I don't intend to attack anyone, but really simply to draw comparisons. You know, Muslims and Christians deal with the same thing. You know, we have a history of people in power taking advantage of those weaker than them. It might be the papacy, it might be an imam. You know, it's not really a Christian or a Muslim thing. It's been happening since the beginning of time. You know, you don't have to be even in a nation state. You might be in a KKK back room, you know, discussing this with your white supremacist followers. You might be in an ISIS bunker in Syria or Iraq. You know, it might be on YouTube, or it might be on CBN, wherever it is. You know, it happens everywhere. People take advantage of others, and this idea of I or we are better than them has been around for a very, very long time. If you refer back to Dr. Oliver's series on the Quran, in one of the episodes, he talks about Adam and Satan. That was actually a pretty illuminating episode, you know, where he talks about, from an Islamic perspective, this idea of I am better than you comes from Satan. You know, it's the original sin in Muslims, if you will. And so the real thing that we have to have is to be aware of this. You know, that there is this idea that there are tendencies for human beings to exert this control over one another, and we have to be mindful of that. And Muslims will do it too. We're guilty of the same thing. It's something that's in all of us, that we all have to, that we're all challenged with.
Thanks, Dawood. And then likewise, a question about women did come up, and I was surprised. Now, we only saw 9 of the 12 lectures, but I was surprised that Dr. Oliver did not address the role and status of women in the Quran. It sounds like you've maybe seen some of the lectures that I didn't see in this series, but here's a question you probably get from other non-Muslims in settings like this. What does the Quran say about the role and status of women in Islam? And how does this translate into women's actual roles? And how are they regarded in the home and community?
So this is a really, really big topic. You can actually spend a couple of sessions on this. But I would encourage you, if you have time, go to iiie.net. That's IIE.net. And go to the section on women. There on the left-hand side, there's a menu item. There are several articles that you can read that address this topic very well. But I'll mention briefly what the Quran mentions is really that there is no difference between men and women in the eyes of God, except in their righteousness. Women and men are to be treated with honor and respect. You know, the Quran it's directed to all of humanity, so there are very few places where men and women are called out explicitly. You know, women are instructed to do the same thing that men are. One example is in chapter 33, verse 35, and just to quote it. Surely for Muslim men and Muslim women, believing men and believing women, devout men and devout women, truthful men and truthful women, patient men and patient women, humble men and humble women, charitable men and charitable women, fasting men and fasting women, men and women who guard their chastity, men and women who remember Allah often. For all of them, Allah has prepared forgiveness and a great reward. So to God, we are the same. To each other, we're different. We are two different genders. In Islam, there may be slightly different rules depending on context or circumstance, but where a rule might favor one, the other is assigned additional responsibility. So for example, women might cover more of the bodies than men do. Men are required to provide for women, not the other way around. Women are entitled to participate in the selection of the leaders in the 7th century, not in 1920, like in the US. Women are entitled to own their own property and inherit wealth in the 7th century, not in 1848, as in the US. You know, we in the US are kind of catching up to what the Muslims have been teaching for quite a long time. But that's what the Quran and Islam have to say about it. When it comes to what Muslims do, there's a difference between what Islam is and what Muslims do. Across the world and across most religions, women are better off the more educated the populace is. And so you'll see women doing very well off in the West and not so well off in third world countries, mainly as a function of education. But you're going to see child brides in southern Pakistan. You're going to see child brides in the southern US. You're going to have abused women in Khartoum. You're going to have abused women in Chicago. You're going to have women in high positions of power in Indonesia, women in high positions of power in Washington. And we finally got someone up in the vice presidency. Haven't made the presidency yet, but we're getting there. You know, in a Muslim home, there's generally going to be 1 or 2 breadwinners, and no one person to stay at home. Who is in which role is really up to those 2 people, you know, the husband or the wife. It's certainly more common for the men to be the breadwinner and the women to stay home, but there is no problem for the reverse to be true. And so it's pretty contextual. And again, there's a lot more commonality than between the way that Muslims and Americans and Christians live their lives than you would think.
Thanks, Dawood. We're pretty good on time. Can you take that last question and just give us a couple of responses to it? Or would you rather go right into interaction with the people? That last question was about how we learn that there's kind of a privileged position for Christians and Jews and Muslims in the Quran, so-called people of the book, which made us wonder, well, what about the pre-Islamic religions, such as animism, perhaps, and certainly Hinduism, Buddhism? And what about the post-Islamic religions that could not have been, you know, envisioned by the Quran, such as Sikhism, Baha'i faith, Mormons, and so forth? Is there that sense of respect and accommodation and tolerance for those other religions that are not people of the book? Is that a question you want to take now, or is that too much to deal with in just a couple of minutes?
I will address it in just a minute or 2.
Okay, good.
How's that?
Yeah.
Excuse me. First of all, if you want to look at religions, Christianity and Judaism are pre-Islamic religions. They came before. If you want to step outside the Abrahamic faith, if you will, however, then you get into Zoroastrianism, Zoroastrians, and Buddhists and Hindus, and then after Islam you have Baha'is and Sikhs and Mormons and things like that. The Quran is a book of guidance, and so it's going to guide by example. The examples that it has chosen to use are the histories of the Jews and the histories of the Christians, and you derive lessons from those. The Quran says that there were many people, and throughout history, all of them received a messenger of some sort. So the Quran recognizes that yeah, there's a lot of people that are not specifically addressed by the Quran that received a messenger. It says in the Quran that no one can be compelled in the faith of their choosing. So it doesn't really matter if you have a 5,000-year-old religion or a 20-year-old religion. If you choose to follow that faith, I, as a Muslim, must respect your choosing. And that's what Muslims have done for almost their entire history. There's a lot more detail that we can get into, but I'll leave it at that. And if there's further questions, we can get into it.
Thanks, Dawood. Thank you for that response and for all your responses today. I'd like to turn it over to the Assembly. Eleanor Prince has a question in the chat. What are the differences in religious practice between Shia, Sunni, and Sufi sects? Sects, S-E-C-T-S.
Yeah. So the Sufi is not really a sect, if you will. It's a practice that many Muslims engage in, whether they subscribe to the Shi'i version or the Sunni version or any of the other minor versions that are out there. You know, the Sufis were a reaction to the idea that the religion is all about law, how you have to conduct each other in social context, which had gotten to the point, you know, quite a long time ago where all anyone knew was all the law you had to follow. There's no really spirituality or godliness. And so the Sufi movement came about as a reaction to that. And it's all about what's your relationship with God. And so the Sufi practices are engaged by many Muslims, regardless of what particular version they might subscribe to. When it comes to religious practices, they're very, very similar between the Sunnis and the Shias. They pray the same way. There's just a couple of minor alterations in procedure. There are a few practices, a few holidays that the Shi'i is Arabic for Shiite, you know, in translation, if you will. A few differences in holidays and what they do on their holidays. But for the most part, the differences are mainly in how they derive their religious knowledge and instruction, because there was a political difference many centuries ago between two groups of people, which turned into the split between the Shia and the Sunni.
Thanks. I'm going to open up to all of you. Unmute yourself if you'd like to make a comment or pose a question to Dawood, or you can put it in the chat. Or if I can see you, wave your hand.
I have covered everything.
Apparently.
There is to cover. Marcy has her hand raised.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Marcy.
Would you explain the difference on how women are treated between the two, Sunni and Shia? Is there a difference?
Not from a religious standpoint, no. They're treated the same. When it comes to cultural differeces, I mean, the vast majority of the Shia live in Iran and Pakistan, and they're scattered everywhere, but that's where they're concentrated. And so the Shi'i practices are mostly follow Pakistani custom and Iranian custom. And so if you see differences, that's usually the place where it will manifest itself in the differences between how Iranians conduct themselves and say how the English or Americans or Indonesians conduct themselves.
Dawood, another question here from Neva. Is there any openness within the Islamic community to the proposals of Ayaan Hirsi Ali for a reformation of Islam, as Christianity had a reformation with Luther?
So Ayaan Hirsi Ali is Somali, I believe, or Sudanese, one of the two, who emigrated to Europe and writes things about Islam in Europe. Just about all Muslims consider her an Islamophobe, and so she is not taken seriously by just about any Muslim. And so I've read some of her writings, and there are elements. I mean, even someone who is vehemently opposed to you might have some good points to make. And I'm always seeking knowledge from anyone, even someone who is opposed to me, because everyone's intelligent in their own way. And so I'll look at some of the things that she writes, and like, there is a point that has to be made about the application of Islamic law in a modern context. But there is also the importance of understanding where your religious scholarship comes from, and what it takes to understand the religion from an expert's point of view, which she doesn't understand at all, which is unfortunate. But that's the problem that we as Muslims face. There are people like Ayaan Hirsi Ali that are not, we don't take seriously for the most part, because they're extremely divisive and go so far to the other side as to be almost opposed to Islam.
Yeah, I did a little research on her. She holds dual Dutch and American citizenship, I believe. She was in the Dutch Parliament. She lives in the U.S. I don't know if she remains a Muslim or not.
That I don't know.
I don't recall right now. Thank you for that question, Neva. Yes, Junior, we've got a few minutes still.
Okay, I have two very basic questions. First, you said that you only speak English, but you must know Arabic too, or maybe you just read it. So that was just a technical question. And secondly, getting back to women, I've been to the MCC in Morton Grove, and the men are down below and the women are segregated. Why is that?
So for the prayers, the men and women are required to be segregated. That was the practice of Muhammad. He instructed the men to stand in front and the women to stand behind. There's no difference in the acceptance of their prayers. That's just simply a logistical location of where they should stand. What many mosques have done is that because there are usually many more men than women that come, if the space is shared, the women tend to get pushed out. And so what many mosques have done is they have made a dedicated space on a balcony or in a separate area so that they do not get pushed out, where only the women are allowed to go. And so it's that's the big reason for the separation in most of the mosques that you'll see. And as far as my language goes, I mean, I lived for a couple of my high school years in Saudi Arabia, so I picked up a little bit of the language, not very much, not enough, certainly not enough to be conversational. But I read the Quran in Arabic and I understand some of it, and so I have a little bit of familiarity, but not enough. I'm still learning.
Thank you.
Good. We still have a couple minutes.
Jane, unmute yourself.
Hi, I have a question about choosing a mosque that you go to. Do you find, I know among Christian churches, there are a great deal of difference between Protestant Christian churches. Would you feel the same way about a mosque? Would you try to look for a mosque that would appeal to your priorities?
Not really. One of the things I take great solace in is that I can go to pretty much any mosque in the world and be welcome there, and feel at home, and conduct my prayers and be at peace. It doesn't matter what language the people speak. It doesn't matter what particular version they might subscribe to. I would be welcome, and I'd be able to pray, and everyone would recognize what I'm doing. They would all have the same Quran in Arabic, and I can read it when I want to. There are some, and the mosque is primarily a place of prayer for Muslims. There are sometimes other functions of the mosque where it is a community center as well. And for that, you may have nationalistic or linguistic differences. So in Chicago, for example, there's a Bosnian mosque. There's a mosque for people from the Punjab in India. There's a mosque for Hyderabadis. There's a mosque for Ethiopians, where they'll primarily speak that language. But anyone is welcome to go there.
We have another minute or so. I don't want to miss an opportunity for any of you to pose a question here. Flurry Lynn writes in the text or in the chat to me, you said that in the Quran, men and women are equal in the eyes of God. Then why separate them in the mosque?
For logistical purposes. You know, we're encouraged to respect one another, and men and women have a natural attraction to each other, regardless of their platonic intent. That attraction is still there. That's human nature. And so for men and women to be side by side with each other when they're in prayer would be a great distraction for a vast majority of people. And so they're separated. That's really the only reason. When it comes to the actual practice of how to do that, we do what the Prophet Muhammad did, where you put the men in the front and you put the women in the back.
Thank you. And Dawood, I so much appreciate your preparation for today, for being with us, for your very open, honest responses to our questions. And this is not a done deal. This is an ongoing, lifelong project of understanding one another. And we do that especially through our partnerships, through Winnetka Congregational Church and the Muslim Community Center, our participation together in the Nurture Multi-Faith Alliance, sitting down together and breaking bread, attending one another's functions, learning from one another, and doing things together in human service. So let's continue this important relationship. And again, I thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Reverend. I enjoyed being here. I miss being at the WCC in person. It's a very nice community that you have there.
We miss being there in person too.